He thought he was raising loyalty. He was actually feeding ruin. From the outside, Tyson Kane looks like the classic untouchable mafia king. Violent, wealthy, impossible to reach. But this story is not about power. It is about what happens when a man builds his world on fear so completely that when he finally breaks, no one knows how to love him back. 12 trained women enter his life and leave. Then a delivery girl notices the one thing nobody else saw. He is not rejecting food, he is disappearing. And in that moment, the penthouse stops being a fortress and becomes a grave waiting for warmth.
So get this, 12 women took the job, and all 12 of them bailed before the 12th day. But number 13, she wasn't even applying. She was just dropping off his dinner, and she's the one who stuck around. Now Chicago's Gold Coast hides people like a vault hides secrets, locked up tight, high above the city where nobody can see the darkness brewing inside. And Tyson Kane was the most explosive secret on the 62nd floor. At 36, the guy was built like the trouble he chased, so damn tall that elevators felt claustrophobic, so broad his bodyguards looked like they were protecting the wrong man. His hands had closed deals no courtroom would ever hear about, and his jaw looked like a god carved it in a fit of pure rage and forgot to smooth it out. A scar sliced right through his left eyebrow, a little party favor from a car bomb meant to take him out 8 months ago. His nose, broken and reset twice, his whole vibe entered a room seconds before he did, and when he walked in, waiters would trip over their words and bartenders just poured his drink without asking. But his eyes, man, that's where the real story was. Usually a cold, hard steel gray they'd turn into black holes on his worst days. But every once in a while they'd go quiet with this deep sadness. Like someone hid the world's most tragic eyes inside the world's most dangerous man, just to see if anyone would ever get close enough to spot them. What happened was a soul-level fracture. That bomb didn't kill him. It rewired his whole system, knocking something loose behind his eyes that turned the guy who ran an empire with surgical precision into a man who couldn't sleep for hearing the explosion on loop. A man who couldn't tell a threat from a shadow on the wall, and who couldn't shut down the thoughts now crawling through his mind. Dark, violent crap the old Tyson would have buried deep. But the new Tyson? He gave them a microphone because the filter between his brain and his mouth was incinerated along with his car. He needed a keeper, not 'cause he was weak, but because his own mind had become the one enemy he couldn't intimidate, couldn't buy off, and couldn't silence with a bullet. So they sent 12 women, all pros. The first one lasted 11 days right before he launched a phone at the wall by her head at 3 a.m. because a ringtone triggered a flashback. The fourth made it 5 days. He locked her in a supply closet for 3 hours because she nudged a file on his desk. The 10th only managed 3 days. She left after he stared at her for 15 solid minutes without blinking. Then Deadass asked if she knew how to dispose of a body. It was her business, apparently. She didn't stick around to find out. The 12th was the final shot. And he tried, he really did, holding it all together using please, keeping his voice level for 5 days. On day 6, the dam broke. He annihilated the kitchen, accusing her of trying to poison his food. After she bolted, he just sat in the wreckage until sunrise, knuckles all bloody, staring at nothing, and realizing with this perfect ice-cold clarity that the women were never the problem. He was the problem. 12 caretakers, 12 separate confirmations. He was too wrecked, too violent, just too damn much. Then a delivery girl rolled up on a Tuesday with a thermal bag on her back and burn scars all over her hands, and the entire script flipped. If you're already hooked on this insanity, smash that like button so it finds someone else who needs this drama. Share it with a friend who knows the right person shows up when you least expect it. And subscribe so you're here for what happens next. Now, let's jump back to that Tuesday night to a busted electric bike parked in front of Chicago's swankiest address, and to a woman named Baylor Finch, who walked into a dark penthouse, saw a dangerous man bleeding out on the floor, and instead of running, did the one thing 12 professionals never even considered. She simply stayed. Baylor Finch was 27, but she was carrying a kind of exhaustion that had no business being on someone so young, a weariness that didn't come from being tired, but from holding up so much for so long that her soul forgot how to feel light. She zipped through Chicago's streets on a clunky e-bike for 3 shifts a day, mornings to the corporate sharks, afternoons to the high rises on the Magnificent Mile, and nights to the Gold Coast penthouses where $300 meals were ordered and forgotten about. A culinary school grad from Pilsen, she had this dream of her own restaurant, but that dream flatlined right alongside her mother's stage 3 cancer diagnosis. From that day on, every single cent Baylor earned got sucked into the black hole of medical bills. Her mom died 2 years ago, but the debt stuck around. $47,000 was hanging over her head like a guillotine. Baylor lived under it in a 350-square-foot studio where the kitchen was 4 steps from her bed and the only window showed a brick wall. At night, after her deliveries, she catered small gigs, a birthday for 15, an office lunch for 20, jobs that paid just enough to wire something extra to Pearl every month. Pearl Finch, 19 and a college freshman, had a slight limp from a rough birth their mom always blamed herself for, even though it wasn't her fault at all. Pearl needed a corrective surgery that year, and her voice on the phone was always way too cheerful, like she was trying to pretend her sister wasn't riding through the city at 10 o'clock at night. Hands covered in kitchen scars, and legs so exhausted they could barely find their way home. For 3 solid months, twice a day, Baylor brought food to Kane's penthouse and never once saw the guy. She only knew the security guards in the lobby, the elevator staff, and the caretakers, all 12 of them. Each one had a different face, but the exact same haunted expression as they took the food. The look of someone just counting down the seconds until they snap. They would just vent to her, unprompted. When people are drowning in that much fear, they gotta talk, and the delivery girl was a safe bet. There and gone fast enough to listen without getting dragged under. The 3rd caretaker told her he'd made her cook his breakfast 4 different times. The 7th said he used the security feed to watch her phone calls. The 9th admitted to one almost normal night, only for him to slam the table the next morning, demanding to know why she wasn't scared of him, insisting her being calm had to be part of some conspiracy. Baylor just took it all in, no judgment, offering a quiet nod. She had 2 shifts to go, and no time for the soap operas of the rich. And yet she picked up on one detail that every single caretaker had missed. A clue you could only see if you'd sat by a hospital bed watching someone you love refuse to eat. The food containers always came back with their contents barely touched. Not just sometimes, but every meal, every day, for 3 months straight. Baylor knew exactly what that meant. She'd seen it in her mom's last days. Her mother didn't hate the food itself. She hated the lonely ritual of eating off a tray in that sterile room with an empty chair on the other side. People who are sick don't just reject food. They reject the crushing loneliness of eating by themselves because eating alone is like admitting you're disappearing and no one is there to see you go. Baylor saw those full meals coming back night after night and thought, the guy on the 62nd floor wasn't just refusing to eat, He was fading out, and nobody was staying long enough to witness it. She didn't know yet that she would be the one. Not on that Tuesday. She ripped a piece of cloth from a kitchen towel, wrapped it around his hand, and tied it with the steady hands of someone who'd bandaged 1,000 cuts. And Tyson Kane just sat there on the floor of his trashed kitchen, letting a complete stranger fix his self-inflicted damage without a single protest. Not because he allowed it, but because the whole situation was so far outside his programming, he couldn't react fast enough to stop it. He was watching her, but not in the way he'd watched the 12 before. Not with that cold, paranoid glare, scanning for the smallest sign of a double cross. He watched her like a man witnessing something totally alien, like someone seeing rain for the very first time, not even sure what to call the water falling out of the sky. Her act of care had no agenda. There was no job contract, no salary, no one barking orders. She just stepped over the shattered glass, turned on the tap, and did what had to be done like it was a reflex, not a decision. And Tyson had no idea how to handle a person who wasn't motivated by money or fear, but by a basic instinct for kindness. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice a raw, ugly sound. It wasn't a question from a host. It was a challenge from a man who knew people only showed up for his money or his blood. "I'm the girl who brings the food you don't touch," Baylor shot back, her eyes fixed on the cloth around his hand, watching for any red to soak through. "How would you know I don't eat?" "Because every box is as heavy coming back as it was going out, for 3 months. You keep a tally?" "No need," Baylor said, and then her eyes finally lifted, locking with his for the first time. "I can tell by the weight alone." A heavy quiet fell over Tyson, not the violent stillness that came before his explosions, the kind his other caretakers ran from. This was the silence of a man cut by a truth so simple it slid past all his defenses and hit something raw, piece of him that was still capable of feeling anything. For 3 months, she'd been a ghost at his door that he never even saw, but she saw him breaking down. She knew he was on his way out. This wasn't something she was paid to notice, just a gut feeling from another lifetime, from taking untouched trays from her own mom's bedside. Food that isn't eaten isn't about taste. It's the calling card of a soul that's been left in the dark for way too long. He stared at her, and in that shattered mind of his where reality and nightmare had bled together, one single thought cut through the static, crystal clear. "You trying to be caretaker number 13? The filter between his brain and his mouth got blown to bits 8 months ago, so the words just tumbled out before he could process his own insanity. The wildest thing he'd said in 8 months of wild talk. Baylor met his eyes, then glanced at her hand, which was still pressing the cloth against his skin. Tucked between her fingers was a shard of glass from the plate he'd just obliterated. It was small, sharp, and sat in her palm like a loaded question. "You're asking this to the person holding a blade to your pulse." And then something flickered across Tyson Kane's face. Not a smile. A smile needed muscles that had checked out long ago, but it was damn close. Way too close. It was like a door that had been welded shut for 8 months was suddenly rattling on its hinges. Not opening, but for the first time, not locked down either. Bennett Shaw caught the whole thing from the kitchen doorway. He'd worked for Tyson for 15 years. He'd watched 12 qualified pros walk into this apartment only to bolt, and not a single one had ever made his boss's frozen face even twitch. The delivery girl stood up, picked up the piece of glass, and dropped it in the trash. She fired off one parting shot before leaving. I'm not a caretaker, but you need to eat. It's cold now, but it beats what's in your fridge, which is a whole lot of nothing. So literally anything is an upgrade. And just like that, she was gone. Tyson sat there on the cold floor, a towel wrapped around his bleeding hand. And for the first time in 4 months, he opened the container. He ate. The food was bland and cold, but it didn't matter. He ate. Bennett said nothing. He didn't have to. He just burned the name on the receipt into his brain. Baylor Finch. Bennett Shaw hit her up the next morning right before her first run. Baylor didn't even let him finish the pitch. No, she said, her voice flat. The answer already decided in the dead of night. The answer at 3 a.m. was the same one she had at 7. I'm a delivery driver. I don't babysit some kingpin. Bennett's tone didn't even waver. He quoted her a salary that was 8 times her current pay. It was a number that would make anyone from Pilsen just stop breathing. Baylor had to admit it knocked the wind out of her for a second before her brain kicked back in. Still no. She hung up, hopped on her janky e-bike, and took off for Lincoln Park with the breakfast order, pretending the call was just a weird dream. The next day, no call. She figured it was over. Rich guys have endless options and they don't chase after a girl from the South Side twice. She was dead wrong. On day 3, she dragged her aching body back to her studio and found an envelope on her table. Pearl had taken it from a courier, leaving a little note next to it. Inside was a file, a full breakdown of her mom's hospital debt. Every single page, every charge, every payment Baylor had bled for over the last 2 years was there in black and white, with the final total in bold print. $47,000. It stared her down like a debt collector who wouldn't leave. Inside the file was one of Bennett Shaw's business cards with 4 lines written on the back. Mr. Kane will make this disappear. No payback, no hooks. All you have to do is try for 2 weeks. Baylor sat on her bed, staring at that number, hating that the first thing she felt wasn't rage, but relief. A treacherous little flicker of hope, because for the first time in 2 years, someone was offering her a way out. She hated that feeling because she knew nothing comes for free, especially not from Tyson Kane's world. She knew accepting was like stepping into a vortex where she didn't control the exit. Guys like him don't forgive debts because they're nice. They do it so you owe them something you can't pay back with cash. And that's when the real debt begins. But Pearl had a surgery coming up. The doc warned that if they waited past her 20th birthday, its chances of working would be cut in half. Pearl was turning 20 in November, and that $47,000 of old debt was sitting on top of a new $40,000 bill. Baylor was working 3 shifts a day, but math doesn't care about how hard you try. Math only cares about the bottom line. And the bottom line was, it wasn't enough. She called Bennett back at 11 that night. He picked up on the first ring like he'd been waiting, and he probably was. 2 weeks, basically. Date. Baylor said. That's it. 2 weeks, then I'm gone, and you will never dig into my personal life again. Because next time, I won't ask so nicely. Bennett was silent, a short, professional pause that promised nothing. He'd hired the 12 women before her, and they all said something just like that. And every single one of them was gone before their 2 weeks were up. He didn't tell her she'd be any different. He just said, I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning at 8. Baylor hung up. She looked at the file, then at Pearl's closed door across the studio. She heard her sister's quiet breathing and told herself that 2 weeks wasn't long enough to change a damn thing. She was wrong. Again. The car showed up at exactly 8 a.m., a black SUV with tinted windows, the kind Baylor only saw in action movies, or cruising through the Gold Coast while she biked past, wondering if the people inside even knew how much milk costs. She had 2 bags of groceries with her. 4 months of deliveries taught her that the fridge on the 62nd floor was a museum, not a kitchen, and she had 0 plans to cook with ingredients that had been around longer than most of her exes. The elevator doors slid open right into the penthouse. This time, sunlight was blasting in. The Chicago sky was pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Baylor could finally see what she had only felt in the dark that Tuesday night. The place was a monument to wasted cash. Italian marble floors. Furniture bought for its price tag, not for comfort. A heavy silence was literally woven into the place, like the air itself was on the payroll to keep its mouth shut. But Baylor blew past the living room, the dining room, and the skyline view that magazines would kill for. She walked straight into the kitchen and stopped cold. This kitchen had Calcutta stone counters with these delicate gray veins running through them like rivers. It had a 6-burner gas range she knew was handmade in France. It was the exact stove her culinary teacher once put up on a screen and said, "This is the one you'll never own, but you have to know it exists." There were double ovens, a copper hood, a built-in wine wall, and every single inch of it was covered in a fine layer of dust that only settles on things that are never, ever used. Baylor put her hand on the stone, tracing a gray line like a musician touching a piano they'll never play but whose value they feel in their bones. She pulled open the oven. Inside were 3 manila folders and a roll of tape. She yanked open the fridge. A 2-week-old takeout box stared back at her with the sad vibe of abandoned food. From the doorway, Tyson was leaning, a silent guardian taking up all the space, watching her with this sharp, wary gaze. Not hostile, just alert. "What is this kitchen?" she muttered, her back still to him, staring at the fridge like it was a crime scene. "It was included with the penthouse." She turned, her eyes flicking from him to the oven full of paperwork and back again. "So you're using a Steinway grand piano as a filing cabinet?" He didn't answer, just arched a single scarred eyebrow. That was all the permission Baylor needed. She started to cook. No permission slip, no consultation, not one word of what she was doing. She pulled out the ingredients she'd bought in Pilsen at 6 a.m, and she started breathing life back into a kitchen that had forgotten what it was for. A blue flame roared to life from the stove, taking back its territory. First came the smell of onions hitting butter, then garlic jumped in, then fresh thyme, creating a scent that screamed care, not convenience. It was the smell of time and effort, and for the first time in 8 months it drifted through the penthouse, reminding the expensive box that it could actually be a home. Baylor put the plate in front of Tyson. He sat down, pulled in not by her, but by some deep instinct that 8 months of paranoia hadn't managed to kill. He took a bite, then just froze. Not because it was bad, but because it was so profoundly right that his system couldn't compute. It was like his eyes adjusting to light after being in a cave forever. This food was the first real thing, offered not as a prescription or out of pity, but as butter and garlic and actual honest-to-God care. Every bit of it was made by a cook with the battle scars to prove it. "So, is it good enough?" Baylor asked, chilling against the marble counter, fully aware of that meal's power. "It'll do," Tyson shot back. But then his entire vibe shifted. A door that was locked down for 8 months suddenly creaked open just enough for Baylor to see a glimpse of the real dude inside. A guy fighting to remember what it's like to be cared for, not because of a paycheck, but because some things can only be said with kindness. 3 in the morning, her second day on the job, and a crazy loud knocking wakes Baylor up. This wasn't a normal knock. It was pure panic, like the person on the other side forgot how to control their own strength. She opens the door, and Tyson Kane is just this massive shadow filling the doorway, his eyes wild in the darkness. But this wasn't the rage that made his other caretakers run for the hills. This was pure terror, a scared kid trapped in a beast's body. "I need a pancakes," he says. His voice was completely deadpan, like asking for breakfast at 3 a.m. was the most normal thing in the world for a barefoot mob boss. Baylor glanced at him, then at the clock, then back. 3 o'clock it's a morning. He just gave a nod, totally oblivious to how insane this was. She didn't even argue. In the kitchen, she hit one switch, carving out a small circle of light in the huge, dark house. He followed her, sitting at the counter like a silent spectator as she started making the batter. Outside, the night was just a black hole. Chicago at 3 in the morning is a whole different beast. Raw, no makeup, totally real. And in that tiny bubble of kitchen light, they sat, bonded not by a job, but by pancakes. "Why 3 in the morning?" she asked, her back turned as the batter hit the hot pan. "Because I don't trust the dark," he answered. He said it like it was a fact, not some deep poetry. It was just a thing like being allergic to shellfish, or not being able to handle milk. The dark was the enemy. Simple as that. Baylor slid a plate of pancakes in front of him and took the seat across from him. The light from the kitchen lamp pooled between them, like a tiny safe zone in a pitch-black world. Then she asked the one question the 12 previous caretakers never got the chance to ask because none of them had her vibe of quiet trust. "What did the dark do that you hate it so much?" Tyson went dead silent, but it wasn't the silence of a brewing storm. It was the sound of a guy trying to find words he'd never used because nobody ever stuck around long enough to listen. "It's like my head," he finally muttered, staring down at his plate. "Too many things I can't see clearly." And just like that, the girl from Pilsen asked the most feared man in the city why he was scared of the dark, and he actually told her the truth. At 3 in the morning, over pancakes, in their little island of light. It was a simple moment, but after 8 months of chaos, it was a revolution. Tyson actually talked about his demons without smashing anything. He was just a guy admitting he was afraid of his own mind to a woman who wasn't sprinting for the exit. Baylor didn't offer any cheap words of comfort. She just nodded and pushed the syrup across the island. They finished their meal in a surprisingly normal silence at 3 a.m. But that piece was on thin ice. Day 4 rolled in, and the vibe completely changed. When Baylor brought him lunch, Tyson's eyes were different. The paranoia was back, the same psycho look the last caretaker saw right before the kitchen got demolished. "Taste it first," he ordered. His voice was flat, but his eyes were a hurricane. "Every single dish. You taste it first." Baylor knew exactly what this was. The sickness was talking, not the man. She knew this showdown was coming. His broken mind was like a high tide of paranoia, and it was peaking. Without a word, she picked up her fork. She tasted the meat, chewing slow and steady. She tried the vegetables. She took a sip of the sauce. Her moves were smooth and totally calm. This wasn't some act. It was the real deal. A calm she learned from years of having to take her mom's meds first, just to prove they were safe. So, poison testing for a paranoid gangster? Been there, done that. Her steady gaze locked onto his chaotic one. "If I wanted you dead," she said softly, "I'd just let you eat that old takeout in your fridge. It's slower, but it'd get the job done." And then the impossible happened. Tyson Kane laughed. Not a smirk, but a real gritty laugh. It was a sound that came from deep down, like a rusty machine kicking back to life after years of being off. It was rough and out of practice, but it was 100% real. Down the hall, Bennett froze in his tracks. In 15 years, he'd almost never heard his boss laugh. And never, ever like this. It was the sound of a man finding a part of himself he thought was long gone. By day 6, Baylor got it. The laugh wasn't a fix, it was just a break in the storm, and a quiet sky doesn't mean the hurricane is over. She was in the kitchen prepping dinner when a massive crash echoed from the office. This wasn't an accident. It was the sound of something getting launched into a wall by a dude weighing over 100 kilograms, a man who had just lost all control. Then came the screaming. Tyson was yelling about being watched, that the walls were bugged, that every word he said was being recorded and used against him. He didn't sound angry. He sounded genuinely terrified, like the walls were literally closing in. He believed it so hard that logic couldn't get through. Because this fear wasn't coming from the rational part of his brain. It was coming from the part that got blown up 8 months ago, and nobody knew how to fix it. Bennett appeared in the hall, holding a syringe full of tranquilizer, his face a total mask. This was a routine he knew by heart. Go in, inject, wait 3 minutes, clean up the mess. But Baylor stopped him. She blocked the hall, even though Bennett outweighed her by 20 kilos. Her voice was quiet, but it had an authority you don't argue with. "Don't. Let me." Bennett just stared at her like she'd just volunteered to go pet a hungry lion. And the beast inside was roaring. She didn't explain. She just walked right into the chaos. Papers were everywhere. A laptop was smashed against the wall, a bookshelf was about to tip over, and Tyson was in the middle of it all, his back to her, muscles knotted with tension, his breathing loud and ragged. She didn't say a word. She just sank to the floor, 2 meters away from him, with her back against the wall, and she stayed completely still. Tyson spun around, his eyes looking right through her, lost somewhere else. He didn't see her. He didn't see the office. He just saw threats in every corner. But she didn't flinch. 1 minute passed, then 2. 3 minutes of thick silence cut only by his heavy breathing and a ticking clock that somehow survived the rampage. Then Baylor started talking, her voice low and steady. It was the voice you used to soothe a kid with a high fever in the middle of the night. Not so they understand the words, but so they feel someone is there and know they aren't alone. She talked about her mom, not the healthy version, but the mom in her last days at the hospital when the drugs couldn't stop the pain anymore and all she could do was scream. The kind of screams that aren't words anymore, just pure, raw sound. The noise a body makes when the pain is too big for language. And Baylor, at 15, then 25, just stayed by her side, night after night, totally helpless. There was nothing left to do, no more medicine to give, no magic words to make it stop. All she could do was be there, so her mom knew that even though she was screaming, she wasn't screaming into an empty room. "Sometimes people don't need a solution," she said, her voice even, her eyes on the floor so he wouldn't feel watched. Sometimes they just need someone brave enough to sit with them in the storm. Tyson just stood there. His body relaxed, not all at once, but bit by bit, with every breath, like a skyscraper being carefully dismantled from the inside. He didn't sit, but the destruction was over. The yelling stopped. He just stood there in the wrecked office, listening to the woman on the floor talk about her mother. And for the first time in 8 months, one of his episodes ended not with a needle, but with the voice of someone who'd seen this kind of darkness before and hadn't run away. Bennett stood in the doorway, syringe still in his hand, watching the scene, completely unable to compute what he was seeing. On the 8th day, at 4 a.m, Baylor woke up. Not from a noise, but from a feeling, the gut instinct she'd developed after years of sitting by her mother's bed, where any little change meant she was needed. So she yanks the door open, and there's Tyson. Not knocking, not moving, just owning the space. But this time, there's no killer vibe, just a guy drowning in loneliness at 4 a.m. His eyes are shot, no edge, no crazy, just pure exhaustion. "What's up?" she asks, her voice gravelly with sleep, but not annoyed, since she's used to people's drama trumping her bedtime. "Had to see you were still real," he mumbles, the words just falling out, totally raw and unfiltered. "I'm still here," she tells him. "Okay." He just spins around and goes down the hall to his room, totally silent. Baylor stays in his doorway, watching him get swallowed by the dark. The shot caller of Chicago, checking at 4 a.m. that the one person who hasn't bailed on him is still around, and it hits her. The scariest thing she's seen in this place wasn't the violence, but the city's top dog terrified of waking up alone again. Then day 9 rolls around, and in walks Franklin Kane. He just materializes from the elevator into the penthouse. No announcement needed because he's got his own code. A perk from when he used to run the whole show. And the way he walks in makes it clear he still thinks this is his turf, no matter what some papers say. Franklin Kane is 62, thin, not super tall, rocking a perfect gray suit with slicked back silver hair. See him on the street, you'd peg him for a professor or a retired lawyer, the kind of guy you'd hand over your life to without a second thought. He shows up with flowers, a fancy bouquet of white lilies, and sets them on the table like he's the world's most caring uncle. His smile is so legit that if Baylor didn't know better, she'd totally buy the act. But she did her homework, digging up stories from 12 previous caregivers. And one of them, Constance Quinn, noticed a pattern. Every time the uncle visited, Tyson would totally spiral for at least 3 days after. Constance never figured out why, but she saw the connection plain as day. Baylor watches as Franklin works the room, gripping the right-hand man Bennett's hand with an authority he never really gave up, then sits next to Tyson. He asks about his health in this super gentle voice, the kind of patient tone a guy uses when he knows time is on his side. Then his gaze lands on Baylor, and it's not a glance, it's a full-on appraisal, head to toe. It's the cold, calculating look of a merchant sizing up inventory, deciding what's valuable and what's trash. He asks who she is politely, and Bennett jumps in before she can answer. She's the new caregiver, and Franklin just nods, flashes a smile, and says he's glad his nephew is being taken care of. He puts his hand on Tyson's shoulder in a way that looks like affection, but Baylor sees it for what it is, a brand of ownership. The whole visit is a quick 20 minutes. He asks all the right questions about meds, sleep, the doctor, Every question is smart, every question is thoughtful, and every single one sends a chill down Baylor's spine. She grew up where enemies are obvious, and she trusts a guy with a visible knife way more than one hiding it behind a smile. Tyson doesn't say a word the entire time. He just sits there, completely still, his gray-blue eyes locked on his uncle, not even blinking. His whole body is coiled like a wire about to snap, and Baylor realizes he's not staying calm. He's burning through every last bit of his self-control to keep from exploding. Franklin Kane leaves. The elevator doors slide shut, and Tyson finally breaks. Not like before, with shattered glass and a roar of rage. This was so much worse. He stands up, faces Baylor, and his eyes, which she'd seen cold, empty, and almost gentle, now held a look of pure, uncut terror. It was a primal fear, not from the demons in his head, but the real-life dread of facing a monster and not knowing if you're sane enough to fight it. "Take nothing from his hand," he warns, his voice a desperate low rasp. "Don't speak to him. Don't meet his gaze." Baylor almost asks why, but Tyson is already gone, the click of his bedroom door sealing him away. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Bennett gently guides her to the balcony, the one place without bugs or cameras where only the 62nd floor wind could hear them. And out there, he lays out the whole twisted story. Tyson's dad, Frank's own brother, died when Tyson was 26. Frank ran the show for 10 years before a council vote forced him to hand it over to Tyson. 8 months ago, Tyson's car blew up on Lakeshore Drive. The official story was equipment failure. Bennett knew better. He quietly dug around and traced the car's last service to a garage secretly owned by Frank. Not enough to prove it in their world, but enough for Bennett to know. Frank was just playing the long game now. He didn't have to try to kill Tyson again. He just needed Tyson to look unstable enough for the council to kick him out. Then Frank would slide right back into power, and the whole empire would be his again. Bennett looks Baylor dead in the eye, and for a second she sees what might be actual concern from him. "You're the one thing he never planned for," Bennett says flatly. "Tyson is getting better. That's the last thing he wants." Standing there on the 62nd floor, Baylor knew. She wasn't just some caregiver for a messed-up guy anymore. She was now stuck in the middle of a silent war she never signed up for, couldn't understand, and couldn't leave without a target on her back. In that life, once you know something, you can't unknow it. And Baylor Finch was now in the know. 2 weeks passed in a heavy silence. It wasn't that they forgot her deadline. It was that talking about it would demand an answer that was way more complicated now than when she first said 2 weeks, that's it. The penthouse had started to change, slowly becoming a place someone actually lived in instead of just a hollow shell. The kitchen was now alive. The 6-burner stove wasn't covered in dust anymore. It actually smelled like real food. On the 62nd floor balcony, Baylor was growing herbs, basil, thyme, and rosemary in little pots. The sheer ridiculousness of growing a garden in a mob boss's fortress was something she decided to just ignore. Tyson was eating, even if it was a fight. Some days he'd glare at his plate like it was an enemy. Other days his paranoia flared up and he'd make her taste everything first. But he was eating, a win none of the 12 women before her had managed. At night, he'd let her sit in the living room while he tried to sleep. Not in his room, just outside the door, reading under a lamp. Just knowing someone else was awake nearby seemed to be enough to quiet his mind and let him get some rest. They were short naps, but it was a start. Then, late one evening, near the end of the 3rd week, Baylor found him by the window, just staring down at the city. He wasn't on guard duty like usual, just looking at the vastness of it all, looking totally lost and small within his own kingdom. Beneath him, Chicago's lights glittered, a web of power he once controlled. Now, from the 62nd floor, he wasn't a king, just a ghost haunting his own throne. Baylor recognized that look, the posture of a man watching a world that had already forgotten him. 12 of them are gone, he muttered, his back to her, his voice dead flat. It wasn't a complaint, just a cold, hard number on a list he couldn't forget. I've been keeping a tally. Baylor stepped up behind him, her eyes tracing the same glittering map of the city. She didn't bother saying they bailed because he was too broken, too explosive, or just too much damn work. All true, but totally useless facts. She never wasted breath on the obvious when a bigger truth was on the table. I'm not sticking around because you need a babysitter, she stated, her voice solid rock. But underneath, a tiny vibration threatened to crack the surface. I'm here because this is the one place where my own mountain of baggage doesn't block the hallway. That got his attention. Tyson finally turned to look at her. She kept her eyes locked on the room, a ridiculous cavern of an apartment with ceilings so high you could fly a kite. A vacuum one guy alone for 8 months could never hope to occupy. There's plenty of space in here, she added, her voice dropping, almost talking to herself. For all the shattered crap we're both hauling around. That one line was code for $47,000 in medical debt, a buried mother, a sister needing surgery, 3 jobs a day, scarred hands, and a dream of a restaurant she put in the ground right next to her mom. She said all that without saying any of it, just using the words shattered crap. And Tyson got it, every last bit. The mental filter he'd lost didn't just make him spew the raw truth. It let him hear the truths everyone else kept locked down. You're not leaving, he said. It had the same dead certainty as when he showed up at her apartment at 4 a.m. that first Tuesday. It wasn't a question. It was a fact finally clicking into place. Your kitchen is a certified disaster area, Baylor shot back, the corner of her mouth twitching. And your diet is a crime against humanity. Bailing now would be gross negligence. And then it happened. Tyson Kane laughed. Not the rusty, grating noise from that 4th day, but a real explosive laugh that erupted from a place so deep it probably kicked up ancient dust. A place sealed off since before the bomb, before the empire, back when he was just a kid in Frank Kane's house, clueless that the world his family built would one day try to eat him alive. The sound bounced off the penthouse walls for the first time, and the empty space seemed to drink it down, thirsty. And Baylor just stood there, listening to a mob boss laugh because she called his kitchen a dump and thought it was the most real sound she'd ever heard. Not because it was pretty, but because it was 100% authentic. And you don't find authentic on the 62nd floor. Pearl's call came on a Thursday. Her voice was pure sunshine, so giddy that Baylor heard the laugh before she could make out the words. For a split second, Baylor almost forgot she was standing in a crime lord's kitchen and felt like she was home, listening to her sister dish about her day. Sis, I got an internship, Pearl chirped. A company found me through the school's career portal. It's totally legit. They said I'm a perfect fit for the program, and get this, it comes with a scholarship. Can you even believe it? I won't have to pay for anything. Baylor asked for the company's name. Pearl said it, and Baylor's entire world slammed to a halt. Not in some dramatic, slow-motion way, but like a system crash. Blood freezes, then floods your heart, making everything sharp and terrifyingly clear. Because she knew that name. She'd seen it printed on a document in Tyson's office on the 6th day, when she was sitting on the floor surrounded by chaos. Lying among the papers was a list of shell corporations Bennett had circled in red. And the name Pearl just said was sitting right there, third line down, next to a fat red check mark and a note from Bennett, part of FK's network. Frank Kane was coming for her sister. She ended the call with Pearl, her voice ice. "Do not sign anything." "Don't move, I'll hit you back." Her voice was pure ice, keeping Pearl from a full-blown panic, but Baylor's own hand was shaking so hard she had to drop the phone before it fell. She found Tyson in the living room, parked on the couch and staring into nothing. That classic state where he was half in this world, half somewhere else. It was his new normal. But as she stood over him, he looked up, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she saw a look she didn't recognize. It wasn't fear or stress. It was straight-up rage, a clean, targeted fury, way more dangerous than chaos, because this time it had a target. "Your messed-up world just brushed up against my sister," she said, her voice sharp as a shard of glass. "I dealt with the 3 a.m. meltdowns. I dealt with the destruction. I taste-tested your food like a royal poison checker. I sat on your wrecked office floor talking about my dying mom just to keep you calm, but Pearl is off limits. Pearl never signed up for this. She's just a student with a bad leg trying to have a normal life. If your darkness swallows her, I'm not just cleaning your kitchen, I'm gone, and I'm taking your sanity with me." Tyson's eyes locked onto hers, and something flipped. It wasn't a slow recovery. It was the sharp crack of a switch being thrown. His gray-blue eyes, usually lost in a hazy fog, snapped into focus, cold, brutally lucid, and absolute. These were the eyes Bennett hadn't seen in 8 months, the eyes of the man who ran an empire with surgical precision before an explosion took it all. Tyson got to his feet. In that second, his raw presence flooded the room, just like it used to dominate every space he entered. It wasn't about his size. It was an aura of pure power, the kind a man has when he knows he's a monster and feels zero need to hide it. "Bennett," he said, his voice quiet but slicing through the penthouse silence like a razor. Bennett was there in the hall in less than 3 seconds. His speed wasn't because he was close, it was a reflex to that voice, the voice of his old boss, a sound Bennett hadn't heard in 8 months but recognized like a soldier, hearing the call to arms 10 years after leaving the service. "Pearl Finch, student," Tyson specified, naming her exact university, which Baylor never mentioned, proving some part of his fractured mind was secretly mapping her entire world. "Protect her 24/7, starting now. No one gets close to her. Nobody talks to her. Nobody lays a hand on her." Bennett's eyes shot from Tyson to Baylor and back. A flash of disbelief crossed his face before he killed it. In 15 years, Bennett had never seen Tyson order protection for anyone but himself, not a single time. But here he was, demanding a full detail for the delivery girl's sister, speaking with the authority of the man everyone thought died on Lakeshore Drive 8 months ago. Bennett gave a sharp nod and was gone. Tyson fixed his gaze on Baylor. "No one will touch your sister," he vowed. This wasn't a gentle promise. It was the declaration of a man who would bend the world to his will, using rules his world allowed, and the normal one didn't. Baylor met his gaze, seeing his gray-blue eyes. terrifyingly sharp and present for the first time since that first Tuesday. She finally understood what anchored Tyson Kane back to reality. It wasn't the meds, or the 3 in the morning pancakes, or her stories on his trashed office floor. That stuff helped, but it wasn't the cure. The cure was having something to protect other than himself for the first time in 8 months. And that something was Pearl Finch, the sister of the one woman who didn't run for the hills. After the Pearl incident, Tyson's mind got clearer. Not fixed, not a full comeback, but the flashes of light between the shadows started lasting longer. In these clear periods, he acted so devastatingly normal that Baylor could almost forget what he was. Then a random comment or a long stare at an empty corner would snap her back to reality. One afternoon, during one of these good spells, she was cooking while he watched from the kitchen entrance, his usual spot. She just blurted out, "Get in here. I'm going to teach you how to chop an onion." She was tired of him hovering in his own home like a guest, and she figured if she ever had to leave, he should at least know how to not live on takeout. Tyson walked into the kitchen. He took the knife she gave him, and she knew instantly, just by his grip, before the blade even hit the onion, that something was very wrong. The way he gripped that knife wasn't for cooking, it was for killing. His hold was pure muscle memory, the kind you get from using blades for things they were never meant for. Blade down, wrist locked, shoulders tense. His entire posture screamed he was about to end someone, not chop an onion. "You're dicing a vegetable, not settling a score," Baylor shot out, blunt as always. She saw his shoulders twitch, a tell she now knew was him hiding a smile. Then she walked right up to him and did something the 12 previous caretakers would have never dreamed of, because they knew what those hands were capable of. She put her hand right over his. Hers was tiny, laced with silvery burn scars from a kitchen accident years back. That small, scarred hand covered his, a hand so huge it made hers look like a kid's. His own knuckles were marked up from 2 decades in a world where violence leaves a calling card. She gently reformed his death grip, turning the handle, uncurling his fingers, and setting them right. Index and thumb pinching the blade's base, the other 3 on the handle. His wrist finally went slack. His shoulders dropped. A hand that had only ever taken life was now being taught by a hand scarred by flames how to use a simple kitchen knife. Tyson glanced down at their hands together and said nothing. No words were needed. Some moments are too heavy for language, and this was one of them. He started chopping the onion terribly. The cuts were a mess, big chunks and tiny slivers, the work of a man using a knife for its real purpose for the very first time. Baylor didn't critique him. She just said, "That's good," and slid the pieces into the pan. That night, they ate the first meal Tyson ever had a hand in making, and while his part was just mangled onions, they both felt the shift. Later that night, at 2 in the morning, Baylor was reading when she heard bare feet on the marble floor. Tyson walked into the kitchen, flipped on just the island lights, and sat on a stool. She followed him silently and started making noodles, knowing his late-night kitchen visit wasn't about hunger. The kitchen had become his safe zone, a place of soft light and spice scents, a refuge from the noise in his head. When sleep wouldn't come, this was the only place that offered him silence. She put the bowl of noodles in front of him. He ate for a minute, then stopped, his chopsticks resting. He stared down at the bowl and just started talking. No warm-up, no easing in. The words spilled out, raw and uncensored, like they always did, now that his internal filter was shot. He told her about the bombing. Not for Dr. Voss's therapy files, not for Bennett's official reports, but just for her in the 2 a.m. quiet over a bowl of noodles. He talked about driving and hearing a click, a tiny noise almost lost in the engine's drone, but he heard it. He was a guy who stayed alive by noticing the details everyone else missed, and in that split second, he knew. The explosion, he told her, wasn't the worst part. His voice dropped so low she had to lean in, his eyes seeing something way past that ceramic bowl. It was the 3 seconds before, the second I knew what was coming and I was completely helpless. 3 seconds, stuck in that car, knowing it was all over. My hands were on the wheel and there was nothing, absolutely nothing I could do. And those 3 seconds, they're not over. The explosion ended, the hospital ended, but those 3 seconds are forever. Every night I close my eyes and I'm right back in that car. I hear the click, I know, and I'm powerless all over again. Baylor just watched him. The most feared man in Chicago, confessing his shattered soul to a food courier at 2 in the morning. And she knew he didn't need any cheap talk about being strong or promises it would get better. Words were useless for both of them. He just needed one person who could look into his darkness and not run. So she reached out, placing her hand over his on the table. This wasn't some movie romance, no sparks or music swelling. It was the same steady, grounding touch she'd given her mother in a hospital room, a silent promise. "I'm here. It's dark, but you're not facing it alone." "Those 3 seconds are gone," she whispered, her palm warm on his hand. "Surviving isn't the fight. The real war is convincing yourself you're allowed to keep living." Tyson looked up, and something in his eyes broke, a change she hadn't seen since she first walked into his gilded cage. The sharpness, the void, the terror, the paranoia, the ice, it all just melted away, leaving only softness. Those slate blue eyes, hidden for years behind the city's most terrifying reputation, were finally seen by the one person brave enough to get close. So Baylor stayed, her hand on his, in the silent kitchen at 2 in the morning, next to a bowl of cold noodles. She knew this was the point of no return, the moment she should run, but she felt anchored to that spot. And that was scarier than any mob boss. The next afternoon, Bennett found her in that same kitchen. He shut the door, his words sharp and to the point. "Frank called a council meeting for tomorrow. He's making his move to take over, and he's using the 12 caretakers who quit as his proof." He had Dr. Voss's notes on Tyson's episodes, statements from the staff about his erratic behavior, all packaged into one perfect story. The boss was broken, a risk to the whole operation. And who better to take his place than the old school, always ready Franklin Kane? "Tyson has to be there," Bennett said. "Calm, in control, the man he was. If he doesn't show or if he cracks in front of them, it's over. Frank takes it all. They'll hand it to him after seeing the proof he's been building up." Baylor's question was simple. How was Tyson? A long, heavy silence hung in the air. Bennett finally answered. "Day 3, 0 sleep. The shaking and paranoia are getting worse. This morning he was clawing at his own skin until it bled, convinced something was crawling under it. Voss wants to sedate him, but a sedated man is a conquered man." He looked right at her, the look of a guy who'd run out of cards and was staring at his last desperate bet. A girl in a flour-dusted apron in a penthouse kitchen on the 62nd floor. Without saying another word, he was gone. Baylor stood alone, watching a basil plant sway, her mind a million miles from Frank's power plays, a world she didn't know or care about. Instead, she thought about her mother. and the nights her mother's pain was too much for sleep, Baylor would sit with her, helpless, learning one critical lesson. When you can't fix it, you do the one thing you know how to do. For Baylor, that one thing was cooking. At 6 that evening, she started. No big speech, no master plan, just a quiet mission. Turn this cold kitchen into a sanctuary, a place Tyson Kane's fractured mind would know was safe. She began with chicken soup, the kind every mother makes for a sick kid because its smell is the universal scent of comfort, not danger. Next up was baked pasta, a recipe she mastered in culinary school. Its smell of garlic butter and cheese, a slow, warm promise drifting through the penthouse. Last came the bread. She kneaded the dough by hand on the cool countertop, a soft cloud of flour rising up before she slid it in the oven. The aroma of baking bread filled the apartment last. A scent Baylor knew that no mind, no matter how broken, could ever register as a threat. Because the smell of fresh bread is the smell of home, and home is safety. It was the only medicine Tyson Kane really needed, so she cooked all night long. The smells wafted down the hallway, slipping under Tyson's door, invading a room that for 8 months had only smelled like antiseptic and cold takeout. It was a quiet, relentless intervention. At 11 that night, Baylor heard his bare feet on the floor. Tyson stood in the doorway. He was a complete wreck. 3 days of no rest had carved deep shadows under his eyes, and his fists were clenched so tight you could see the faint tremor in his hands. But he was here. He had left his room of pain. He'd been lured out by the scent of safety, a primal instinct that not even a bomb had managed to kill. Baylor didn't offer him any useless words about sleeping or waiting for morning, phrases he already knew were lies. She just set a plate in front of him. Chicken soup, baked pasta, and a thick slice of warm bread with butter melting into it. Then she gave him a 6-word promise. Eat, sleep, I'll guard the door. Tyson's eyes flicked from her to the plate and back. And then he ate. He finished every bite. For the first time, he didn't make her test it for poison. Even his broken mind knew that the woman who spent the night filling his home with the scent of safety wasn't the one who would try to hurt him. So he ducks into his room, and Baylor? She just grabs a chair and parks herself outside his door, setting up a watch party for one under the dim hall light. She wasn't moving. A total sentinel, just like she was at her mom's hospital, on the floor of his trashed office, and every single night in his living room, a constant wall against the dark. And get this, Tyson slept. For the first time in 8 months, the guy got 6 straight hours, no phantom explosions, no looping nightmares, all because a guardian was on duty outside and the scent of home was inside. Those 2 things did what no doctor's prescription could: straight up security. At 7 that evening, Tyson Kane walks into the boardroom. The 12 guys at the oak table go dead silent, like someone hit the mute button on the entire world. For the first time in months, he's clean-shaven, revealing a jawline that looked like it was carved by an angry god. Hard and final. He was decked out in a black 3-piece suit Bennett picked, a suit that didn't just whisper money, it announced total ownership. And his gray-blue eyes had a look Bennett hadn't seen in 8 months but recognized instantly. Sharp, cold, and 100% locked on. His gaze swept over them, and every man felt it like a cold hand flipping through his darkest secrets. And here's the kicker. Just 12 hours earlier, he was a shaking wreck in his kitchen, running on 3 days of no sleep with bloody knuckles. Not a single one of these guys knew. Only Baylor and Bennett saw it, because Tyson Kane never forgot the one rule the bomb couldn't erase. Power is all about perception, and this room needed to perceive a king. Frank was chilling at the far end, playing the self-crowned head of the table, the puppet master. As Tyson entered, Frank cracked a smile, that pained, worried look of a loving uncle doing what's best for the family. If Baylor had been there, she would have called it out immediately as the exact same smile he wore when he brought white lilies to the penthouse. The exact same perfectly tailored mask. Frank starts talking in this soft, heavy voice choked with fake sadness. He claims he called this meeting out of duty, not ambition. Oh, he's just so deeply concerned for his nephew's well-being. He insists the organization's stability is more important than family ties. He then lists the 12 caretakers who quit and the doctor's reports calling Tyson unfit to rule. He caps it off by suggesting a temporary power shift, until Tyson's better. The speech was a 4-minute masterclass in manipulation. When he finished, the room went dead quiet, the kind of silence where powerful men start calculating their next move. Tyson just sits there. He leans back, his hands resting on the table with a look of pure, unbothered calm. When he finally speaks, his voice has none of the rage from his office, none of the desperation from the night the last caretaker bolted. It was level and sharp, like a fresh razor's edge, slicing the silence without even trying. My Uncle Frank is concerned about my health, he starts, making the word concerned sound like an accusation. For that, I'm truly grateful. But before this council casts its vote, I have just one question for you all. Just one. His gaze, a piece of gray-blue ice, jumps from man to man before landing dead on Frank. Who can tell me why the car I was driving that day, the car that nearly became my tomb, was last serviced at a shop secretly owned by Uncle Frank? The room didn't get quiet. It died. The air stopped moving. And for 3 solid seconds, 12 hardened men forgot how to breathe. And those 3 seconds, Baylor might have thought, stretched on for an eternity. Just like the 3 seconds Tyson heard that click before his world turned to fire. But this time, those 3 seconds belonged completely to Frank. The mask held firm. The smile never twitched. His body was pure stone. After 62 years in this life, you don't break over one question. But his eyes went completely dead. Baylor wouldn't have noticed, but Bennett did, standing at the back of the room, remembering everything. Tyson said nothing else. He didn't need to. He just put the truth on the table like a live grenade with the pin pulled, basically telling them to choose how close they wanted to stand. The vote was DOA. Nobody even whispered the word postponed. The whole idea of voting just vanished into thin air. I mean, trying to take out a boss is one thing. Trying to take out a boss who just implied his rival tried to blow him up is a whole other level of stupid. No one wanted their name on the wrong side of that ledger. Frank left right after Tyson, his back straight, his smile flawless. But he left, and that was the only thing that mattered. 4 floors down, in the parking garage, Baylor Finch was in Bennett's black SUV, gripping her own legs so hard her knuckles were white. Bennett's phone was on the dashboard, speaker on full blast, and she'd heard every damn second. She heard Frank's slimy pitch. She heard the suffocating silence. She heard Tyson's question, delivered in that flat, lethal tone she'd only heard about in stories. This was the boss, the man from before the bombing. And in the cold concrete of that garage, she finally understood why men feared him. She heard the 3 seconds of death, heard the meeting dissolve into nothing. Then she let out a breath she didn't even know she was holding. Her hand slowly uncurled, revealing pale marks in her palms where her nails had dug in. And she thought, with a horrible clarity, that she had just prayed for a mafia boss to win a power play. And it wasn't for $47,000. It was for him. For the man who ate pancakes at 3 a.m, stood guard at her door at 4, and held an onion knife like it was a combat weapon. The one who told her about the longest 3 seconds of his life over a bowl of cold noodles. And that realization was way more terrifying than anything Frank Kane could ever cook up. Frank could only take over an empire, but this feeling, this could take over her soul. Frank made his play 3 days later. He wasn't the type to lose and walk away. He was the type to lose and flip the entire damn chessboard. The piece he used was a 19-year-old girl with a slight limp walking home from the university library on a Wednesday. The guard Bennett assigned to Pearl got a forged message to redeploy saying she was already safe. A fake order sent through the legit system because Frank, the former boss, still had keys no one had bothered to take away. As the guard peeled off, Pearl disappeared in the 4-block walk home. A walk that took her 15 minutes. And 15 unprotected minutes was all the time Frank needed. Bennett called Baylor at 6 p.m. with 2 sentences. Pearl never made it to her dorm. We're looking. In the penthouse kitchen, the world under Baylor's feet just disintegrated. Not in a dramatic way, but for real. The air in her lungs felt thin, useless. Everything around her became distant and pointless. Only one thing mattered: a girl with a bum leg, lost somewhere on the streets of Chicago. She had already lost her mother, watching her fade out day by day. That pain taught her how to endure anything, but it also showed her the one thing she could never, ever survive: losing Pearl. Pearl was the reason for the crappy delivery shifts. Pearl was the reason she took $47,000 from a killer. Pearl was the reason she stayed in the gilded cage. Pearl was all she had left. Without her, Baylor Finch had no reason at all. She found Tyson in the living room. Bennett had already filled him in. He was on his feet, not sitting, but standing, his entire body wound as tight as a bowstring. And those gray-blue eyes had that same cold, sharp focus she'd seen before. But this was deeper, harder, infinitely more dangerous. The first time was a warning. This time was a promise of what was to come. Baylor stood in front of him and didn't cry or beg or scream. She was dead silent, and her silence was more terrifying than any noise the 12 caretakers before her had ever made. This was the quiet of someone at rock bottom, using every last scrap of energy just to not collapse. Tyson looked at her and did something he had never done in his 36 years, something his world would never permit. He apologized. "I'm sorry," he said, the 2 words coming out of him like a foreign language he was speaking for the first time. It was a language he'd never needed to learn. "I'll get Pearl back, not because you work for me, but because you stayed. I owe you something money can't repay." 40 minutes later, Tyson, Bennett, and 4 others were in 2 black SUVs, gunning it south. Using the city's hidden network, Bennett traced a signal to an abandoned warehouse in the back of the yards. An industrial skeleton, the rotting corpse of a Chicago that didn't know about penthouses or fine suits. Tyson walked into that warehouse with Bennett right behind him, and Bennett, who had been with him for 15 years, knew the man striding into that building was brand new. This wasn't the blind rage of the last 8 months. This was a clear-headed, purposeful danger. He was in complete control, moving with the deadly precision of the man he once was. But now he was driven by something that man never had. A reason that had nothing to do with an empire, but everything to do with the sister of the woman in the penthouse waiting for him to bring Pearl home. What happened in that warehouse doesn't need a detailed replay. It's enough to say Pearl was found in a back room. Her hands were tied, but she was unharmed. She was terrified, but she was whole. And the guys who grabbed her were about to have a very long time to regret taking Frank Kane's job offer. Bennett drove them back, with Pearl wrapped in a blanket in the back seat. Baylor was waiting in the elevator lobby, and when the door slid open and Pearl stepped out, Baylor held her sister in a hug that only people who have nearly lost everything can ever know. And just like that, Baylor pulls Pearl in, trying to shield her from the whole messed up world. Pearl is a wreck, sobbing, but Baylor's eyes are bone dry. She ran out of tears 2 years ago when her mom died. She just holds on. Meanwhile, Tyson is frozen 3 meters away, hands stained with blood that isn't his. He wants to go to them but can't. A single look at his hands is a reminder that his darkness doesn't belong in their light. This is a moment for 2 sisters, and he's just the monster lurking in the shadows. So he stays back, close enough to see it all, but far enough not to taint it. From over Pearl's shoulder, Baylor's eyes lock onto his. Her warm brown gaze cuts right through to his soul. The elevator lobby on the 62nd floor is dead silent, thick with the smell of blood and old bread. But her eyes say everything her mouth can't, and his broken mind soaks it all in. Later, Bennett hits Tyson with the coldest line imaginable. I've served you for 15 years. Tonight was the first time I was ever truly afraid of you. Not because you lost your mind, but because you were in absolute terrifying command. The next morning, Tyson confronts Frank at his office. No crew, no guards. This is a Kane family reckoning. Frank's sitting there in a gray suit, looking way too calm. That's his most dangerous trait, the ability to watch the world burn without flinching. But Tyson doesn't sit. He stands, making Frank look up at him. In their world, the man looking up is the one who's already lost. He drops an envelope on the desk. Inside is the proof. Service records, 8 months of witness statements from Bennett, and logs showing the fake alert to Pearl's bodyguard came from one of Frank's shell companies. Tyson's voice is dead calm, but laced with poison. 2 choices. You vanish from Chicago for good, or this envelope lands on an FBI agent's desk Monday. It wasn't enough to put Frank in jail, but it was more than enough to trigger an investigation that would tear the Kane empire apart. A move Frank himself had used on a rival 30 years ago. Blood gives you a chance to walk away, not get carried out. Frank glances at the evidence, then at Tyson. For the first time, the mask on the 62-year-old man is gone. He's just a guy doing the math, and the numbers ain't on his side. Frank chose to walk. Not a word, just a slight nod. The move of a man who knows he's been beaten. Tyson turns and leaves, and the 2 Kane men would never lay eyes on each other again. That night, a new kind of quiet settles over the penthouse. Pearl is safe. A new guard on her door. It wasn't the lonely silence from before Baylor, or the tense silence of Frank's threats. This was the quiet after the war, the kind of silence where you can almost smell the rain, where everything got wrecked but is still standing. And what's Baylor doing? Washing dishes. Because no matter what psychodrama just unfolded, no matter who was saved or who got exiled, dishes still need to get clean. Baylor Finch was the kind of person who put the small things back in order to stop the big things from breaking her. Tyson walks into the kitchen. She knows his footsteps now, heavier and more deliberate when he's near her, like each step is a choice. He stops behind her, his usual silence hanging in the air. She'd figured out it was a searching quiet because words didn't come easy for this dude. "You stayed," he finally says. "I told you I would," she answers, her hands still in the soapy water. "Why?" "For real?" Baylor kills the faucet, dries her hands, and finally turns to face him. Tyson Kane, standing in his own kitchen, a place she'd found tax files in the oven 4 weeks ago, but now it looked like a home. His gray-blue eyes finally asked the question he'd been asking without a single word. When he stood outside her door at 4 in the morning, when he talked about 3 seconds over noodles, when he stayed 3 meters away with bloody hands, it was all the same question. And now she answers. "Because of how you held a kitchen knife," she says. "Like a weapon. But you let me fix it. A man who lets someone reteach him something that simple hasn't given up. Because you stood by my door at 4 a.m., not knocking, just needing to know I was there. That isn't crazy. And that's what someone does when they're so lonely they're afraid to sleep, terrified of waking up alone again. And because you stood 3 meters away while I held Pearl, with blood on your hands, scared of ruining that moment. A man who knows to stop, who looks at himself and chooses not to touch the one thing he wants to protect. That man isn't the monster everyone says he is." She pauses, her eyes locking with his. "Under all your broken parts, you're the kindest man I was never supposed to meet." And Tyson kisses her, or maybe she kisses him. They'd never settle on who made the first move. It was like a downpour. You don't ask which drop started it, you just know everything is getting soaked at once. In that 62nd floor penthouse kitchen, 2 people carrying a world of baggage finally put it down long enough to hold on to each other. A month later, the place was totally different. Not because of new stuff, but because life had finally moved in. It showed up in the smell of garlic in the morning and fine layer of flour on the counters that Baylor never wiped away. It was in the sound of Pearl's laughter from video calls in her new apartment, a bright, open space for someone learning to live again. Pearl had started physical therapy, sending a new video each week of her legs getting stronger. Baylor would watch them in the kitchen, then put her phone down and keep cooking, because if she watched too long, she'd start crying, and Baylor Finch had a strict no crying before noon policy. The penthouse kitchen was officially the heart of the operation now. The balcony had gone from a few pots to a full-blown herb garden. Basil, thyme, rosemary, and mint, which Baylor planted just because Tyson liked the smell in his tea at night. He'd never been a tea guy before, but maybe he loved it, because it was the first thing he smelled every morning, a sign that she was still there. Every day at noon, the bodyguards would line up for lunch, because Baylor always cooked too much, and somehow the stone-cold operator Bennett Shaw was always first in line. He'd claim it was for security reasons, a lie they both saw right through. The real reason was in the food container he held onto like a lifeline. Tyson's issues were still there. Some nights he didn't sleep at all. Sometimes the paranoia came back, making him stare at empty corners and mutter weird things. But now, when he got up at 3 in the morning and went to the kitchen, he wasn't by himself. She'd be there, sleepy and with messy hair, asking what the shadows were whispering about tonight, her voice as casual as if she were asking if it might rain, as if she were just asking what he wanted for breakfast. That simple, normal act was a cure no doctor could ever prescribe. Their arguments were legendary, loud, frequent, and brutal. It was the clash of a man with no filter and a woman who never quit. She'd complain about the army of cameras. He'd fire back about her going to the market without a bodyguard. She'd go off about his lack of vegetables. He'd complain about the balcony turning into a jungle. But their fights were never cruel. They were raw and real, the kind of arguments you can only have when you respect someone enough to tear into them and then sit down for dinner 5 minutes later. 12 women had come and gone. 12 times the truth Tyson Kane already knew was confirmed. He was too broken, too much of a mess, too far gone. He was a forest fire that even other fires didn't know how to handle. Then the 13th person showed up, and she wasn't a caretaker. She was a delivery girl with scarred hands, a thermal bag, and the kind of attitude that comes when you've run out of things to be afraid of. She wasn't looking for a storm. Her whole life had been one long hurricane of poverty, sickness, and loss. So when she met the hurricane known as Tyson Kane, she didn't run. She just asked how long the storm would last, and if he had eaten. She didn't fix him. She fed him. She sat with him in the quiet. She stayed. The 12 caretakers before her weren't failures. They were just wrong. Not as people, but for this guy, for this gilded penthouse prison. They signed up for a job and found a disaster. Baylor wasn't looking for a job. She was looking for a place where someone understood heavy burdens, and she found it on the 62nd floor, in a massive kitchen with a man who held a knife like it was a weapon, but let her show him the right way to use it from day one. Some love stories are about two perfect people finding each other. This isn't one of them. This story is about two broken people finding a way to fit. Not perfectly, not gently, not in any way you'd expect, but in the way two flames merge in one kitchen, too intense for anyone else to get near, too stubborn to be extinguished and molded perfectly to one another. That is the story of Tyson Kane and Baylor Finch, and that kitchen held them both. Maybe the real truth of the story isn't about love, but about staying. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight or to win, but to just sit with someone in their darkness without demanding they turn on a light for you. It's a reminder that no one is too shattered to deserve someone asking, "What are the shadows saying tonight?" And that sometimes the place we belong isn't perfect, but is just big enough to hold all the broken pieces we carry. If their story got to you, please smash that like button so it can find others. Share it with someone who you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel to join us for more stories that hit you in the gut. We really want to know how this story made you feel. Whether you saw yourself in Baylor, in Tyson, or in the person who stayed when others left, drop a comment and share your soul, because every one of your stories also deserves to be heard. We wish all of you listening tonight good health, a joyful life, and peace with every passing day. Thank you for being here with us. Until the next story, good night.
Life lesson: compassion is not weakness. It is the only force capable of breaking inherited violence. From a distance, Tyson's world appears to be a familiar tragedy, a kingdom built on fear, ruled by men who mistake control for strength. In such a world, affection is transactional, loyalty is conditional, and survival requires emotional mutilation. Tyson is not merely a damaged man, he is the natural product of a violent system that trained him to distrust tenderness. His uncle weaponizes that system, his empire rewards it, his trauma completes it. Then Baylor arrives and the story quietly changes genre. What makes her so disruptive is not romance, it is interpretation. Everyone before her interprets Tyson as a threat to be managed. Baylor interprets him as a human being in collapse. That difference is everything. Where others see danger, she sees dysregulation. Where others see cruelty, she detects grief that has lost its language. In that sense, she does not simply care for Tyson, she interrupts the moral logic of his entire universe. This is why the story works as a lesson about life. Violence is rarely self-contained. It travels through families, institutions, and identities. It is inherited, normalized, and eventually defended by the very people it destroys. Tyson thinks he is building power, but he is actually living inside a machine designed to consume him. Baylor's compassion becomes revolutionary because it refuses that machine's terms. She neither submits to it nor imitates it. She answers fear with steadiness. There is an important truth here. Compassion is often misunderstood as softness, yet real compassion is demanding. It sees clearly. It does not romanticize damage. It simply refuses to believe that damage must have the final word. Baylor does not erase Tyson's darkness. She gives him a space in which he no longer has to become identical to it. The deeper lesson then is this: people do not escape destructive cycles by winning them. They escape them by encountering a different pattern, a slower voice, a safer room, a person who does not weaponize vulnerability. What Tyson needs is not another display of dominance, but proof that intimacy can exist without manipulation. In many lives, the cycle continues because nobody imagines another script. This story argues that healing begins when someone does. Baylor becomes that someone. She is not stronger than the Empire in the conventional sense. She is stronger because she offers the one thing the Empire cannot produce: mercy without agenda. And sometimes that is the only thing powerful enough to end a lineage of ruin.